As said in my last video, I believe that dwarves would actually live hauled up in their mountain fortresses, simply because they are bulky, very strong, and thus produce a lot of heat that their bodies need to send off into the air around them, and therefore temperatures in the high 20s, which are pleasant to us, would be deadly to most dwarves. And again, therefore they would, at least in summers and during the day, stay in their mountain fortresses while still conducting a lot of trade and commerce with the outside world. But dwarves are also portrayed as great blacksmiths. And this will be the question for today's video. Would they actually be great blacksmiths, given their physique and their typical portrayal in fantasy, or would this not make much sense? Would this just be a cliché that would fail to hold up when measured against reality? Let's see. First and foremost, dwarves built their homes in mountains, in tunnels and fortresses, and almost all of their holes would be fortresses simply because they would repurpose the mines they already have hammered into the rock, and sometimes through the entire mountain. If miles upon miles of tunnels are already dug out, stabilized, and when ventilation vents have already built, because of course dwarves would use the difference in air pressure on different heights and especially on different sides of their mountains in order to ventilate their tunnels, then it would just be much more economical to reshape the already existing and proven tunnels in an area that also have been already integrated into whatever type of logistic the dwarves have set up to transport out all of the ores and coal, instead of founding a new home entirely in a different area. And this is also one of the reasons for why dwarves would be great blacksmiths, because they would quite literally live atop of vast seams of iron and coal, the two main ingredients for steel production and blacksmithing. So right from the start, their weapons would have a great advantage in production cost. And the same goes for various dwarven-made tools and metalworks. Additionally, since they sit right atop of the coal, they also have access to a heat source that burns cleaner and at higher temperatures than wood or charcoal, making dwarven ore purer and of better quality. And the same goes for anything the blacksmiths make. They just have access to better fire. Additionally, dwarves would be able to resist heat much better, again thanks to the long beards that would insulate the front-facing end of the dwarf, and because blacksmiths and smelters would work closely under the mountain surface, or even in some huts outside or rather atop of the vast dwarven underground cities, so that the smoke could very effectively be transported away from the actual habitable areas within the mountains. And therefore they could also easily cool down by simply resting their backs on the cold rocks or stone that make up their workshops. And since the outside of their houses and their workshops would be constantly taking in the cold sub-zero temperatures of the mountain environments, and since the layers of ice and snow atop of a mountain would actually conduct heat much more effectively than the hot air inside, dwarven smiths would also be much more effective than human smiths, simply because they could cool down more effectively and therefore work longer hours at greater efficiency. And of course, dwarves could also bring much more strength to bear when hammering a blade or forging a hammer. So from their physical location to the low price of the raw materials required, all the way down to their own strength, dwarves have all of the prerequisites to become excellent blacksmiths. But are they actually able to become excellent blacksmiths, or would their bulk and their muscular form stand in the way of forging? And in my opinion, their greater strength would lead to hardier, somewhat shorter, but not necessarily less dexterous fingers. So they should be able to do all of the finer works a smith is required to do. And even gorillas are able to moderate their immense strength. So a species on par with human intellect should have no problem to do so. In fact, since dwarves are often portrayed as to be longer lived than mankind, they would also be able to accumulate much more knowledge during their professional lives, which actually might last well over a century, compared to the mere 40 to 50 years we humans tend to work on average. So in conclusion, yes, in my opinion dwarves would be indeed excellent blacksmiths, since they have all of the ingredients they need to forge available at a fraction of the cost and in close proximity, can stomach the heat and the physical labor required much more effectively, and since they are much more robust than us humans, and they have also roughly the same amount of dexterity, but a much longer lifespan, which leads to much greater experience. And in the next part of my little analysis, we will take a look at how exactly dwarves would conduct their trade business, for I believe that dwarves would be the primary arms dealer in most fantasy worlds. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.